Hi guys, welcome back for another episode of the IBD Hub. I'm Julia De Mauro, your host. Today I'm extremely excited to have a discussion with Bogdan Manta about how to create an impactful presentation, workshop, and negotiation. Before getting into the episode, I wanted to make a short introduction about things that have been happening in the past few weeks and really talk about Black Lives Matter, which, in my opinion, is extremely important. So just to give you a little bit of background, when we started the IBD company, the reason why we did it in the first place was really to allow people to collaborate no matter the background, the ethnicity, sex, or religion. We are really standing behind that. And we wanted all these talents to be able to come together, collaborate, and create innovative projects all around the world and actually make a change. And so equality for us is an extremely big value. And racism is really something that we ban from anybody that we work with or any teams that we work in. We believe that diversity is power, and we really stand behind that. And we really think that diversity helps for innovation. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because in the past few days, I've realized that our field has a lot of margin for change. And that's why I wanted to address it to you guys now. So as you probably know, there is very little minorities represented in the architecture, construction, and real estate field. Most of times, management teams are Caucasian men, which is not necessarily the right representation of the internal team of the company or of the users that we design for and the cities that we represent. So I saw that a lot of people and companies within our field kept silent, and many didn't even mention anything this week and carried on business as usual, and that really surprised me. It's a thing not to talk about political matters. I understand that, and we also don't convey any political idea, but this is a matter of human rights. So it needs to be addressed and addressed correctly as well. And I found it quite painful that no one really tried to say anything. There is never a right way to say it, but trying is better than not doing anything, in my opinion. So I truly believe that altogether we can change something. And I've heard a lot of people, saying like it's impossible to change things, etc. But actually, for the people who want to make an impact on this subject and make a little difference, that starts with yourself and what you're in control of. So whether it's changing your mindset, your attitude towards people, or simply your ability to manage a team or lead a company, every little helps, actually. Recently, I've been talking with the director of an architecture practice who said that, yeah, he wanted things to change and he would try to change things. And I answered to him, like the only things that you can actually change are the ones that you're in control of. So if you're able to hire people of color or people from minority groups, or women as well, into a management position. That's already a change, a big change. Also, if you manage to give a career opportunity, and I'm talking about career opportunity, not just a job that is underpaid, a career opportunity to minorities, I think that is already a very big impact. So it doesn't need to be something huge, but you can start from somewhere, I'm sure. Then my second point, and I'm going to be quick, is that we as architects have the duty to understand what's going on in the world in order to be able to anticipate how people will want their city to look like in the future, and how we can solve social issues through architecture and urbanism. So in the next few weeks, I don't know whether it will be next week's episode or the one after, I will bring two guests onto the table who are specialized in the impact of architecture and urbanism. And they will talk about how urbanism and architecture have had an impact on the segregation of minorities in megacities. This is meant to understand how minorities have been excluded from the rest of the population, and what mistakes have been made and how we can do better. So yeah, that was my introduction about this subject. Please, if you have any questions or need any advice, if you have an international team and you would like to talk about this equality theme, also within your firm, please do it. And if you need any advice or any question, I'm always available through LinkedIn. So now let's start with today's episode with Bogdan Manta. Bogdan runs the Essential workshops, and he's a specialist about public speaking, negotiation, and how to run impactful workshops. And today he's here to give us some advice on how we can improve our skills, whether it is in presentations, talks with the clients, and workshops with all stakeholders. Hi, Bogdan. How are you?
Hello, good morning. Doing
Good
very
morning.
well. Waking
Thank you.
up.
Yeah, waking up as a bit early in the morning, but it's
I did
going to
wake up
be.
at 5:19 this morning, but
Oh, wow.
yeah, I always wake up at 5:19, 5:20 without a clock. But usually around 10:30, 11, I have what we call a dip. Some people call that coffee time. I call that lunch, or even dinner sometimes. But yeah,
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you so much for coming on to our new episode.
thank you so
Uh,
much for having me.
yeah,
Very curious.
I'm very excited to have you here as an expert for public speaking, negotiation, and much more. Would you like to maybe introduce yourself in more detail and explain us what you do?
Not really. It's the one thing I never really like because, I mean, you know me very well, and most people who know me know that I don't really like to talk about myself.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that it is about me. I think it's about whatever learnings I can share, and the people that can learn from them. So in general, I really don't like to talk about myself like that. But maybe it makes sense to introduce a little bit to explain the background. I have a background in neuropsychology, neuroscience, and I've done a lot of neuromarketing. And recently went a lot into digital psychology, or how to be memorable, impactful online because of what's happening right now in the last few months. And of course, for 17 years, I've been in the events and production industry. I've worked in every industry with, every person. I've done shows, productions, events, conferences. And there, of course, I've done a lot of speaker coaching, pitching. We had to pitch for events. We had a 98% success rate, which was very humbling basically everything we would pitch, we would win, more or less. We, gathered a lot of information in terms of how do you present, how do you facilitate, stakeholder management, how do you negotiate, what images work, your voice, and the overall context, how do you use context, and was lucky enough to be in so many different industries that pretty much I know very well what works in every given industry and every specific industry as a result.
Yeah. No, I've participated to many of your workshops actually, especially for public speaking and the negotiation part. But we also had a look together at how to make an impactful workshop with clients. So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about today, because most of our audience is are architects or in the construction industry. And sometimes they come to me with questions about how to really be impactful during a pitch, how to present a project without being boring. And what I've seen from my experience is that many people focus on little details of the design and really dive into the project because, of course, they spend time and efforts to make this project happen. But that maybe is not necessarily what the client is interested about. So I was wondering if you could maybe advise us on what you think is best.
Absolutely. And this doesn't happen only in the in your industry. It basically happens in most industries where people focus on the how and the what. How, what, but they don't bother for a second to actually ask, the counterparty or the people on the other side of the table if that's what they actually want or that's what they actually need. So they go there, they mumble, because that's what I call, they go into detail about things that nobody asked necessarily, and then they lead a conversation in that way. And what happens then, people who are there like, okay, well, they're not really going to answer what we want, but at least let's just go in that direction. And then they have a conversation, they're convinced that it went great. But it went great in their direction. It didn't mean that they answered the questions that the client had. And then afterwards they get a call that they didn't get the pitch. Or. And, there is a way how to change that pattern and, that narrative. And that is by asking the why. And going to your client or to your customer or to your potential customer, right, if we're pitching, and saying, okay, why are we doing this? What are your goals? What are your objectives? What do you need? How do you need it? Let's be honest. And the more answers you give us, the more practical we can do this thing. A lot of people don't ask it because they're terrified that people might answer something that they don't have as a solution. But if that is the case, why do you even go to pitch? Again, I've seen this in a lot of industries happening. We forget the why, and we forget about the fact that this is supposed to be a partnership, and a partnership, starts with learning about each other. And how you learn about each other is not by telling about your services and I did this, I did that. They know what you did. That's why you're invited to the table, Maybe it's time you start to ask them about who they are, what they need, what their wishes are, and all those details. And of course, very important, you go into those specifics. I'm not saying specifics do not matter. Specifics do matter, but the relevant specifics. Let them ask you what they need to hear, and you can always add stuff that you want them to hear. But it has to be relevant to what they need.
Yeah. Well, what I personally see happening is that most architect or most construction company, the how and the what, they are very similar from one another, right? So the clients sometimes get applications from architects or competition designs, and they all look extremely similar because the how and the what, at the end of the day, you build a building and you answer to the program that the client gave you on a piece of paper. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't make it easy for the client to pick which one, actually. And I think that's maybe where the why comes in, like really giving a feeling and a story about your project and integrating some keywords of the client that he put in the brief in order for him to perceive that you understood what he wanted. I don't
Correct. It's
know.
the difference between listening to understand and listening to reply.
Mm.
Unfortunately, most people listen to reply, they don't listen to understand, which means when you listen to understand, when someone asks a question, you might want to take like a second or 2 seconds of a break to take in the question and then to come with the answer. That is listening to understand, which means you listen actively and then you actually come with an answer to that specific question. Listening to reply is even interrupting the person while asking the question or being very anxious for that question to end so you can answer. Have you really thought it through? And that's the difference. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, but everyone is doing it like this. And it always takes me back to something that my mom told me when I was very young and we were very poor, ex-communist country like everyone else. And I would go to her when I was 11 or 12 and complain that I only have one pair of jeans when all my colleagues had 2 or 3 pairs of jeans. And mom, why can't I have a second or third pair of jeans? I was 11, mind you. I haven't seen a banana by then. I saw a banana for the first time when I was 13. Anyway, and my mom kept on telling me, well, if everyone goes at the edge of a cliff and they all jump off that cliff, will you jump off the cliff as well?
No.
And I said, well, no, why? So then she said, then why would you want to be exactly like everyone else?
Yeah.
And this is something that kind of, defined me, personally and professionally. And I always say this to people. When people are saying, yeah, but everyone does the same thing. And I'm like, okay, so if they're all going to jump off a cliff, are you going to jump off a cliff as well? If everyone is putting a point to a building, a corner to a building, are you going to do the same corner? I thought that actually it's supposed to be unique. It's supposed to be different. So if you want to be unique and different, why do you focus on doing the same thing that almost everybody does? It's such an ironic thing. We all want to be different and original and unique, yet we all want to do exactly the same thing that everyone else does.
Yeah.
When it comes to pitching, I don't get it. That's not how you win a pitch.
Yeah. And how do you think we win?
Differentiate yourself from your competitors. How you differentiate yourself from your competitors is by going and asking your potential client or customer, why are you doing this? What are your pains? What are your fears? What are the past experiences? Why are we here? Maybe you had the same partner for 20 years. Why do you invite us? Do you invite us just because you want to, it's part of your internal process, or do you invite us because you have a problem with your long-lasting partner? How did they disappoint you? How can we make sure that we don't do the same mistake? What do you need? It's very rare that people ask, what do you need? They say, we offer this and we have that and this is this building. Did I ask you? What do you need? Start with that. What do you need? Also because, it's very interesting to focus on that. A lot of the briefings are subjective. And sometimes you go to a solution, to a subjective briefing that has been written by a different team, and now you're meeting different people in that a pitch or meeting or whatever, and there maybe they don't even associate entirely with that brief. So take that brief and say, we read this, however, your building looks like this, or we read this, but you're dressed like that. We see quite some contradictory items. Why is that? What do you need? Why is it like this? Why? And let me tell you, people absolutely love that, because if you say, I'm here because I really want to understand and I really need to understand who you are and what you wish and how to help, that is what gave us a 98% success rate on pitches.
Yeah. No, I also, I wanted to ask you also about the workshop environment. So, because many of us have to be kind of a leader and facilitator at meetings with clients and stakeholders. And most of the time, it is extremely complex, and each group of stakeholders have their own idea of what should be in the building or how the design should look like. And we need to be kind of mediators. And I was wondering, how would you advise people to act in these situations?
Well, when it comes to such meetings, the art of facilitation is something very complex. And it has to start with intent. You really want to go there. If you go there, you really, really want to facilitate in a way that is, good and positive for everybody involved. And my question is always, do you go there to facilitate, or do you go there to influence or to manipulate? And that is the first question. Either way, whatever that is, I'm not here to judge, but then adapt your facilitation skills to whatever, reasons that you have. But first of all, start with the why for yourself. Why am I doing it, right? How do I want the result to be at the end of the 2, 3, 8, 6? So basically go backwards. Most people, I call it plan, produce, perform. People produce and perform, but they don't plan. And that planning part is so important. And, the irony when it comes to architecture, right? The planning part is such a fundamental, the measurement and everything, calculations. Yet when we go into such workshops, we don't plan. Well, you fail to plan, you plan to fail. How am I going to facilitate it? Who are the stakeholders? Who is in that meeting? I remember when we did the one-on-one together, I had asked a lot of questions about who is going to be in the meeting, where are they from, what is their cultural background, what are their expectations, with who other companies have they worked, what is their experience, what do they expect, do you know what they expect, did you ask them what they expect?
Yeah.
Or do you assume what you expect? So all these things, the more you plan in advance, the easier you make it on site. Number one. Number two, I tell you one thing. A potential client loves it when you go there and you ask questions showing that you really listened to, you researched about them, you researched the people, and they say, oh, wow, how do you know that? And you say, well, I did my homework. It is very important to be here prepared and be prepared before this meeting. They will always put a big check on your list, because this is what people love. This is what people very rarely get. So this preparation is so important. And of course, then it links, from the facilitation, you link to stakeholder management. How do you manage those stakeholders? Who are those stakeholders there? Are the decision makers in that workshop? How do you make sure the decision makers are there? If they're not there, how do you make sure that whatever you discuss is being taken to the decision makers? How many different roles of decision are there? You need to make this easy for yourself and for them as well. And the more you are in control of this knowledge and this information, the easiest it is for you to actually, really ace that workshop. Workshops are very difficult. I'm not going to hide that, and we should never take them easy. We should prepare a lot. We should be ready for a lot of different elements. But again, if you do that, then you have the highest chance possible of, making it very successful, that work.
Yeah, for sure. And so because we always come into the room with several design options. But from what I hear, from what you say, we should already know which option we would want the client to pick, right?
One of the things that I see very, very often is that people go with one option in mind and they're fixed only on making that happen. But on the other side of the negotiation table, because let me tell you, everything is a negotiation. You go into a workshop, it's a negotiation. You go to buy bread, it's still some sort of a negotiation. Every sort of exchange or report you have with another person or people, there is some sort of a negotiation happening there, because it's one of the oldest ways how we interact with each other. Neanderthal throws a bone, the bone goes back, bam, you have a successful negotiation. You should always go with two, not one, but two possible scenarios that you like, both. Which means you go there with 3 options or with 4 options, totally up to you, but make sure that there are 2 of them that you actually are okay with, because no matter which of the 2 will be chosen by the client, you're still fine with it, and you still calculated it. Will it take more time to prepare 2 options? Yes. Will it be more successful for you? Absolutely. And I see this a lot, and I'm glad you mentioned this, Julia. I see this a lot of people going with one solution, and they go there and they try to push on that solution on the client. You should give free will. And no matter what they choose, you're fine with either of them.
Yeah. It's also, I'm also curious to know, like, how would you, because most of the meetings that we have, sometimes it's a waste of time. No one takes the right, well, not the right decision, but takes decision in general. Architecture is quite subjective, so there is no right and wrong. But I see that there is always meetings planned every week or every month about a project, but it just doesn't go necessarily forward.
No.
So how do you think we could shrink this process in a way?
This is one of those questions, and again, those who know me, they know that one of my favorite answers is it depends. And I'm never giving such an answer to such a question because, as I always say, it depends. It depends on so many different factors. Who are the stakeholders? For example, where is the meeting taking place? Why are those meetings happening? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? Is it in the evening? What kind of meeting that is? What kind of interaction do you have? What kind of engagement? Where are they coming from? What is their cultural background? What are their expectations? What are your expectations? What is your cultural background? Can you even have a conversation with them? Because if you're Dutch and they're British, you might have a problem already from a cross-cultural differences. There's so many different things that you need to keep in mind. So that's why I always answer to it depends. And my recommendation there is always pause, take a step back, prepare, and understand all these elements and why you are doing this. Because if you keep on going there as if you're going to the next meeting and to the next meeting to the next meeting, you're going to have 35 meetings. You're wasting their time, you're wasting your time, and you're not going anywhere. Go there with the purpose of shortening the amount of meetings just by asking the right questions, by creating the right engagement, by creating the right interaction. So again, you see, it goes into, a lot of people think that if you put a lot of time into the preparation time, then you have to add also preparation time next to the 200 meetings you're going to have. Incorrect. The more time you put into the preparation part, the more you're shortening the repetition of events that happen, and you're much more in control, let's say, of the narrative. So, we need to reconsider these kind of things. For as long as we're going to go, just going with the flow, we're never going to be able to control the narrative.
Yeah, and I think that also ties in with the right balance between being a facilitator and a leader in a meeting. I don't know what you think about it, but I just think you need the right amount of both in order to lead the client somehow to take a decision. So
correct. This leads very, very much into credibility. A lot of people think that you showcase your credibility by talking about yourself for 20 minutes. I have been recently in a workshop where the facilitator, which was anything but a facilitator, the gentleman spoke for 47 minutes about himself. The first 47 minutes, he spoke about himself. It was supposed to be a 4-hour workshop, interactive. 1 hour of the 4, he spoke about himself. It wasn't even that interesting. Next to the 47 minutes that I wanted to literally chew on my wrists and suck on my own blood. I hope that's visual enough. This is not how you develop credibility. If you want to be truly a facilitator, a good facilitator will facilitate a conversation, will engage everyone, and he or she will show their expertise by bringing subtle examples from their own experience to support the conversation. You never make it about yourself. Facilitation is not about you. It's about everyone in the room, and in a very smart way, you bring elements from your own experience. You bring elements from past projects. You talk about something, say, oh yeah, this reminds me of a past project that we had, da 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 da. Rather than, oh yeah, and we had this project, and let me tell you about this project because I think it's interesting for you. Sorry, nobody cares. The title of my next book, whenever I'm going to write a book, sorry, nobody cares. And this is where people know that I'm very flexible and I'm very open and I'm very, but I'm also very
straight,
direct and straightforward. Yeah. And very often I tell people, nobody cares.
Yeah.
So again, it is very much about this expertise and facilitation. If we facilitate well, we will give much more of our credibility than talking about ourselves and showing millions of slides of stuff we've done in the past. Nobody cares. We did not invite you there to massage your ego. Sorry. Quite the contrary. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see with pitching. People start with talking about themselves rather than talking about, who invited them there. And only at the end, be humble and, bring a little bit about yourself. If they ask, and guess what? They always ask. If you don't start mumbling about yourself, they will always ask. No. Otherwise, they're like, okay, I've had enough. 47 minutes.
Yeah, well, the ego, especially in our field, is
is extremely
Oh,
present.
absolutely. Especially in the, I've worked with architects. I worked in a few projects with architects,
Yeah.
and I've been brought a few times because I've actually been brought there to facilitate. It was like Lord of the Rings, you know,
Mm.
when the gathering of all the big shots were there and everyone was fighting. It was like a presidential, like a US presidential convention where all the candidates were fighting for me time because
Yeah.
everyone wanted to talk a little bit more about themselves and what they did. And I was like, I get it. You're all great. We're here because we're all great. How about we talk about something else about then how great you are? And almost everyone, and maybe that's an extreme case, but almost everyone was just grabbing that me time just to talk about their achievements. And I was like,
I
sorry.
think I think that that's very representative of architecture and construction meetings
It's like,
somehow.
I know who you are. That's the reason you're here. I invited you because I already know who you are. If
Yeah.
I want to hear more about you, I will have a one-on-one conversation and I will ask about you. But if I invite you to join a workshop, it's because I want your expertise and your expert opinion to brainstorm together and to do something together. I'm not inviting you, once again, sorry, nobody cares.
Yeah, I've been in a meeting once where the developer and the architect did not agree
Oh,
between
how
them,
did
and
that go?
in the same team to pitch to the client. And it came to a ego-centric war where the architect started like drawing on the floor as a protest to what the developer was saying to the client. So the architect was just on the floor pretending to sketch another project because he didn't have time to listen to the developer pitching to the client.
Isn't it
So
wonderful that you officially past childhood at the age of 11 or 12, that you behave like a spoiled brat? Nobody needs a spoiled brat. Nobody wants to work with a spoiled brat either. And I know this might sound a little bit, but you invited me. So um, look, for a lot of people, very often people don't want to hear certain things. There is a God complex in many industries. Architecture, the architecture world is one of them, where you have this God complex and everyone wants to be the god of thunder, the god of cement, the god of sand, and the god of water. You know what? There's a reason nobody believes in gods anymore. There were too many and they were too full of themselves. Didn't work.
yeah, yeah. And what do you think about hierarchy when it comes to those meetings? Because in my experience, like if the big boss was going to the meeting would take a different turn than if it was a project manager, for instance.
Right. And again, I can talk from my own experience when I've been part of some of these. I've been part of some of these meetings, and I do remember one that was in San Francisco. It was almost surreal. We were on the 35th or 39th floor, whatever, in San Francisco, in this gorgeous meeting space. There were around 18 people around the table, around an oval table, and then the C something O joined, and the chief architect officer, or something like this, with one of those C things that I didn't hear before, and I was like, "See what? Oh, anyway." And there was a pretty cool conversation before those two people joined. The moment they joined, suddenly it was a masquerade of, it was just weird. And maybe I wouldn't have experienced it that weird if I wouldn't have been with the same people before the two joined.
Yeah.
And then the two joined, and even their body language changed, and all of that. See, so funny. And people are doing an introduction around the table. I don't think I said much because in general, like I said, I don't really like to introduce myself. And then you should see how it was so weird and unproductive and hierarchical. And then at one point I said, I'm sorry, I am one of your partners. You flew me from Amsterdam. And it's still morning, so I'm still quite active. But the later it gets, the more jet lagged I'm going to be. And you paid quite some money for me to be here. This meeting is not going anywhere. And I'm sorry to tell you, I'm coming from the Netherlands. I'm very direct. Before you two came, actually there was quite a conversation. The moment you two entered, everyone changed. What is up with that? Why are you all changing? Are they not normal human beings? And everyone was like this. Everyone was like, oh my God. And I was like, listen, I'm one of your contractors. You pay me. You paid me for this anyway. If you're going to tell me to leave, I'm going to leave. You paid me anyway. but for the sake of having an interaction and engagement and a conversation, you brought me here because I have quite some knowledge. How about we make sure that we harness that shared knowledge that everyone has here, and you leave the titles at the door? I said, how about everyone takes their name cards? I said, we take the name cards, we put the name cards outside the door, and then we come back as normal people and we work. Then everyone like looked at me, looked at the two, and the two stood up, they took their name tags, they dropped the name tags outside, they opened the door, they dropped the name tags, everyone went, dropped the name tags, we all came back, and then you should have seen how everyone was like sitting relaxed and everyone was laughing and joking because we literally put the hierarchy and the titles outside. Now, was I expecting that will happen? Yes. Why? Because I researched the two people, the 2C whatever, and I did a behavioral profiling, and I knew exactly that is what they are going to do, because they were the type of people who would never kick me out of a meeting because they would say something about them, going back to ego, going back to stakeholder management, going back to negotiation, going back to know your audience in advance. And it worked. So you see, do some preparation work and then you lead it in the right conversation. Then you're going to have a great facilitated meeting and everyone's going to love it. And we got a lot of emails afterwards saying that this was one of the greatest things we had. And the company, apparently when they meet, they still do just that. They leave the name tags at the door. It's like, like in certain Asian countries, you will leave your slippers outside the door when you enter. The same thing here, they will leave the name tags outside the door because they want to put aside the hierarchy.
Yeah. No, that's I think very efficient and impactful.
And don't give them any chalk so they can start right on the ground. That is so childish.
Yeah, well, things happen.
That is so childish. What I would do to those people, I would basically, we're talking about different level of communication, right? You have the adult, the parent-child, adult, and child-parent. The moment one turns into a child, it will force the other one to turn into a parent. And that is the one thing we should never do. You should never become a parent. You should stay as an adult to only showcase how ridiculous that person is. Unfortunately, in most cases, what happens the moment it becomes a child, the other one will automatically turn into a parent. And that is a very messed up type of communication that we should never have.
For sure. But, leaving the name tags outside of the meeting room is something. But I think that in some instances, especially whether you're a woman or, someone of color, or even someone very young, even if you put the name tag at the door, there could be some change in behaviors just because. So I know something about it because, I'm a woman in the industry. I made it my strength instead of a burden. But is there any advice you would give to people that are usually a little bit judged at first in a meeting room because of those factors, and how they can think differently in order to have an impact on people?
It's a very, very, very difficult topic for me, and I think it's one very difficult topic for you as well, especially now when we're recording this, and especially with what happens in the United States. And I'm coming from an Eastern European countries. I'm Romanian originally, and you can imagine I've left that country many years ago, but I've experienced a lot of judgment. I've had police putting me in a corner in a train between Czech Republic and Germany simply because I had a Romanian passport, just because that was the passport that I had. Nothing. So I've experienced, and a lot of other stuff, not only that, but I've experienced a lot of things. But also I have friends from a lot of different religions, ethnicity, sexual orientations, colors, and so on. And I've seen a lot of racism. I've seen xenophobism. I've seen so many things. It's very difficult. I think it's horrible that we are in 2020. I'm also part, for example, of Lean In, which is like a women organization to empower women and to fight biases. And we're going into a lot of biases, which is gender biases, color biases, ethnicity biases, and all that. Things will not change if we don't take a stand. Things will not change if we don't talk. things will not change if we don't try to facilitate more. And it's difficult, and it will continue to be difficult, Julia. And the only thing I can say is we have to fight twice as much than other people. Just because other people are born with a specific skin color, and I mean, I'm a white male Caucasian. I'm privileged, right? I'm what they call white trash privilege. And probably I would have been white trash privilege and behave like one. But again, because I'm coming from Eastern Europe, I'm coming from, a country where, everyone is laughing about me stealing. And there's a lot of other prejudices, and there's a lot of other things next to that when it comes to my identity. Because of that thankfully, because I can only say thankfully, that always kept me away from being white trash privilege, or, or not understanding how privileged I am very often. But I've also been with friends of mine in a store, and I've seen that I was treated differently because I'm a white Caucasian male compared to someone else who was African American or Asian, or so many different things. We have to work harder, and we have to make sure that we have conversations, not reactions. I see a lot of people having reactions. Again, I don't blame them, and you cannot blame them. It's normal to have reactions. It's normal to be angry. It's normal to be frustrated. It's normal to want to react back. I just in general believe that we can change narratives, and we can change people's minds much more with having conversations with them than having physical reactions or calling their names and so on. Now, again, that being said, I know how difficult it is. It's such a heavy topic. It's difficult to stay calm sometimes when you see injustice. That sometimes you have a lot of people who are not necessarily racist or xenophobe or whatever. They're just ignorant.
Exactly.
They're insensitive. And having conversations with those people and making them aware of the fact that they are ignorant and they are sensitive, rather than calling them ignorant and insensitive. If you call someone something, that person will by default react to protect and act back. But if you'll have a conversation with them and you will make them conclude themselves that they are ignorant and insensitive, we might change a person. And this is what we want to do. Change people one by one, one by one. That's why conversation, we go back to workshops, we go back to facilitation, we go back to everything. Have discussions, have conversations. Talk about context, talk about your point of view, their point of view, have respect and perspective on their point of view, make sure that they will understand yours, and try to talk about it, and try to bring it back to 2020 people. It's 2020, you see, I'm also getting quite emotional about these things as well, because I'm just amazed that in 2020 something like this happens. It's just ridiculous.
Of course. It is. It's for me, especially I grew up in Africa, and I've seen it. I've seen the response. I've seen how white people destroyed Africa. So I've learned, from really little, what it is to have hate for white people and Black people, because I've always been in the middle somehow. And then in Europe, it was more the discussion about being an international woman. So I can't even begin to understand how they feel. So I'm not gonna speculate on that. But if I, as a white woman, I feel like this, I can only imagine what it must feel for them. But in terms of professionalism and meetings, I think it's very powerful to not need to be validated by other people. If you're invited in a meeting, you're invited because you have the knowledge and the expertise to be sitting there. And that shouldn't shake your confidence at any point or influence in the way that you are speaking, just because people are being judgmental or giving you the looks, or making it can be also just a joke. Or, how many times did I go to a meeting and then they asked me if I would serve water, thinking I was the secretary when actually I was the project leader of the project, Those things can be shaken people up before or during the meeting. But it is extremely important to really believe in yourself and what you're doing, and the big why you're doing it, in order to shake this prejudice in a way. And
it's a very valuable point that you're making, and I think it's also good to add on the fact that, and again, it's a very, and we're not going to go now into identity and psychology because we can talk about that for days and months and years. And it's a very good point that you brought about not wanting or needing other people's validation, and linked to that is also understanding that if you don't need someone's validation, if you don't need someone else's opinion, you're also not going to react to it when you get something which is really weird. Very often I've been told in pitches, oh, he's not only pretty, but he also thinks. Which is like the most retarded thing to say to a person, and people thought that it's funny. It wasn't, because I fought with my image, and I'm very, when I was 11 years old, I think my grandmother sent me to school with 2 bricks in my pockets because she was terrified the wind will blow me away. I was a small child and I've been severely bullied. So I had to fight to a lot of things. And one of the ways I kept myself alive was the fact that I was smart and I was ambitious and I was helping others. So when someone comes and tells you, oh, you're not only pretty, you're also smart, it's like it shackles years of trauma and growth and development. But don't react to it, because it says nothing about what you went through. Ignore that. Ignore such behavior. We call that benign neglect. Ignore poor behavior. Rise above it. Rise above. Hold on to yourself, to who you are, to the to the behavior that you have, to the ethics that you have, to the values that you have. Ignore such poor behavior, because you know what? Those people will kind of take themselves out of the equations themselves. And usually people react much more when you don't. People will get it much more when you don't react to such poor behavior, when you just ignore it, you don't answer to it. People will take much more from it than what you actually do respond. And, don't let yourself influence. A lot of people also want to provoke. Do not change who you are and your values, and the way you are as a professional, because some people will provoke you. You will always have people to provoke you. That is part of their game. Very often it's part of their negotiation game. They want to take you offline by provoking you, and if you're giving in, and they will be very good at doing that because that's the only thing they do, they provoke, and you will give in. And it reminds me of one of the quotes from, I think it's George Bernard Shaw, who says, you should never go into a fight with a pig, because you'll get dirty and the pig will like it. Yeah. So it's a very extreme thing, and we're not talking about that, but it's just a way of explaining that, stay true to yourself, focus on the positivity of everything, and bring people into conversations. Because the wonderful thing is, some people will provoke not necessarily intentionally, but because they've done that for 20 or 30 years. Give them a chance to be different. Give them a chance to change. Ignore that poor behavior, focus on the positive things, bring a lot of expertise and so on, and even those people will change, because some of them were not taught better. Some of them did not have a better example, but many of them do want to change. So they just need the right catalyst. Yeah. Let's try to be the catalyst rather than trying to be the judge and the executioner.
Exactly. Oh, thank you so much for all of this knowledge, as usual. And thank you for coming on to this episode. It was lovely having you.
Thank you for having me. I hope it helps. I know it's a difficult topic, and it's always going to remain a hot topic, because people come together, and then a lot of things are supposed to happen, and there's so many complex things, and especially in this industry, because like I said, there's a few industries which are very specific. This is one of them, and I've been involved with a few projects, so I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So my utter respect to you and my admiration to you, because we've had a few conversations, and you still go through some of those meetings, and you still come up with a big smile on your face. So my appreciation for you, Julia, for just trying
persevering
and doing it, and holding your ground, because it's very important. So
thank you, Bogdan. That means a lot coming from you. So Thanks.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm looking forward to next week. And in the meantime, please follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We will also publish some links if you want to donate for Black Lives Matter. So please keep an eye on things. And thank you so much for being here like every week.